Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. We are continuing talking on about the issue of divorce, and we were discussing the narration of Ibn Umar when he divorced his wife when she was in her menstruation period. And we mentioned that the two types of bid'ah type of divorce is when you divorce your wife in a state of purity after having intercourse with her, and the other one is when you divorce her in her menstruation period, because in both of these times you are not divorcing her in the appointed time which Allah has legislated for wives to be divorced. And the iddah of the divorced wife, the waiting period of the divorced wife, will either be 3 menstrual cycles if she menstruates, otherwise 3 months, or it will be until she delivers the load. And the reason why you're not allowed to divorce her in a menstruation period is because then you will unnecessarily lengthen her iddah period, because this current menstruation period in which you divorced her will not be counted as one of the 3 menstrual cycles which she has to wait in. And as for divorcing her in a period of purity in which you have had intercourse, then you don't know, she may be pregnant because of this intercourse. And the way to find out that she's not pregnant is if she undergoes a menstrual period. So if you divorce her in this period, in a period of purity after having intercourse, then you do not know what her iddah period will be. Will it be until she delivers the load, or will it be 3 menstrual cycles? You are not sure. And the idea of a divorce is that you have to be sure how long her iddah period is going to be. So Allah Jalla wa Ala says in the Quran, فَطَلِّقُوهُنَّ لِعِدَّتِهِنَّ. So divorce them in their proper times, which means you divorce her in a period of purity in which you have not had intercourse with her, or you divorce her while she's pregnant. Because if you divorce her when she's pregnant, and you know that she's pregnant, then in this case, we can be sure what her iddah period is going to be. It is going to be until she delivers the load. So when she's pregnant, in fact, there is no idea of a sunnah type of divorce and a bid'ah type of divorce. So when she's pregnant, you can divorce her at absolutely any time you want to, as long as you know she's pregnant. Because then her iddah period will begin as soon as you give the divorce, and it will end when she delivers the load. So note here then that when she's pregnant, the restrictions are lifted. So if somebody is going to divorce the wife, the first question is she pregnant or not? If she's pregnant, then you can divorce her at any time and there's no restriction. If she's not pregnant, we further ask him, when you divorced her, was she in her menstruation period or was she not in the menstruation period? If she was in the menstruation period, we say that this is haram, and then the difference of opinion is the divorce counted or not? And we said that by the balance of the evidences in the authentic narrations, it appears that this talaq is counted from the 3. So in a case like this, we would have to tell him, wait until she finishes the menstruation period, then she needs to finish a period of purity, then she needs to go in the second menstruation period and then finish that. Then when she becomes purified from the second menses, you can then divorce her before having intercourse with her though. And of course, this is the instruction which the Prophet gave to Ibn Umar. But if he tells us that no, he divorced her when she was in a period of purity, then we would have to ask her, did you have intercourse with her before you divorced her or not? If he didn't, then we say yes, this divorce is counted and it's a valid divorce. If he did have intercourse, we say no, this is a bid'ah type of divorce, and you have to divorce her in a period of purity in which you have not had intercourse with her. And again, according to the balance of the evidences, it appears that this divorce is counted. So the point is that when it comes to a pregnant woman, there is no talaq bid'i or talaq sunni. Rather, you can give the divorce at any time as long as you know she is pregnant, because you know exactly when her iddah period is going to be. It's going to be until she delivers the load. And so any time you divorce her while she's pregnant is a valid divorce, as opposed to a woman who is not pregnant. So notice this crucial difference. Also, if your wife does not menstruate, then again there is no talaq bid'i or talaq sunni. Rather, you can divorce her at any time, because the point is, she does not have to wait for any menstruation cycle. Her iddah period will begin immediately when you give the divorce, and she will simply wait for 3 months. And this is the rule which Allah gives in Surah At-Talaq. And here's another difference of opinion amongst the scholars. Many scholars say that because you're not allowed to divorce her in her menstruation cycle, you are also not allowed to divorce her in her postnatal bleeding, because the postnatal bleeding and the menstruation cycle share the same ruling in most cases. And this would be the dominant opinion amongst the scholars. The other opinion is that you can divorce her in the postnatal bleeding and that this is perfectly permissible. And the reason they give for this ruling is that they say that the postnatal bleeding has got nothing to do with the iddah period of the woman when she's divorced. Rather, the iddah period is pertaining to the menstruation cycle and has got nothing to do with the postnatal bleeding. Therefore, if the woman is in a postnatal bleeding, it's as if she is just in a normal period in which divorce can be made. And so if you give a divorce in the postnatal bleeding, then her iddah period will begin as soon as you give her the divorce. And this is not the same as giving her a divorce in the menstruation period, because in this case now, the menstruation period in which you gave her the divorce is not counted as part of her iddah, which are the 3 menstrual cycles. So it's not counted as from the 3 menstrual cycles. Rather, the first menstrual cycle, which is counted as part of her iddah, will begin when her next menstrual cycle begins, not this current one in which you divorced her. But the same thing is not said about the postnatal bleeding, because it has nothing to do with the iddah period of the divorced woman. So this is another difference of opinion, and most scholars hold that the divorce in a postnatal bleeding is not allowed, just like it is not allowed in the menstruation period. So we have established that the difference of opinion is well known and well founded when it comes to the question, is the divorce counted in the menstruation period or not? However, from this, there arises another problem for us to consider. Supposing now a man does divorce his wife in her menstruation period, and this man is also aware of the 2 opinions concerning this issue. One opinion says that the divorce is valid, and the other one says that the divorce is not valid. And the man says, well, let me opt for the safer opinion then, because they both seem to be valid opinions, so I'll opt for the safer one. So now the question is, which opinion is the safer one to opt for? So if he says that the safer opinion is that we will say that this divorce is counted. Well, okay, this divorce is counted. So when she finishes her iddah period, and she is separated from him, and then this woman marries another man. But then it could very well be the case that in reality the divorce was not counted. So in fact, this woman is marrying a man who is not halal for her, because officially she is still married to the first husband, because it may well be the case that in fact with Allah that divorce is not counted, because it was a bid'i type of divorce. So here we have fallen into a problem. So if we go the other way around and the man says, okay, the safer opinion is that the divorce is not counted, and so he continues to live with her as a normal wife. But then the problem with this is that if in actual fact with Allah this divorce is counted, then he will be making this woman halal for him, whereas in actual fact she is not halal. So it appears that it's not actually possible to go for a safer opinion, because both opinions will lead us to problems. Therefore it appears that the only way around it is to look at both of these opinions, look at the evidences, and fear Allah as much as you can, and go for the opinion which you believe to be closest to the truth. And we mentioned before that when it comes to the woman who does not have a menses, because either she's too old or she's too young, then there is no particular time period in which you give a divorce. Rather, a divorce can be given at any time. Likewise with a woman who does not have an iddah. So for example, a woman you have married and you have not entered into privacy with her, if you divorce her, she does not have to wait in an iddah period. Rather, she is immediately separated from you, and the only way to get back with her would be through a new marriage contract. So with a woman like this, you can divorce her at any time, even if she is in her menstrual period, because the point is, you divorce her in a menstruation period, she becomes separated from you, and the only way to get back with her would be via a new marriage contract, so she does not have to wait in an iddah period of 3 menstrual cycles. So just to sum up, a pregnant woman, and a woman who does not menstruate, and a woman who does not have an iddah period, for example a wife you have not entered into privacy with, then with these types of women, the issue is flexible. There is no particular time in which you have to divorce her, rather you can divorce them at any time. Hadith number 930. وعن ابن عباس رضي الله عنهما قال: كان الطلاق على عهد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم وأبي بكر والسنتين من خلافة عمر طلاق الثلاث واحدة. فقال عمر: إن الناس قد استعجلوا في أمر كانت لهم فيه أنات، فلو أمضيناه عليهم فأمضاه عليهم رواه Muslim. From Ibn Abbas, he says that the divorce during the time of the Prophet and the Khilafah of Abu Bakr, and in the first 2 years of the Khilafah of Umar, 3 divorces in one sitting were counted as just one divorce. Then after, Umar said that the people have sought to hasten something in which they had flexibility. So perhaps we should just give them what they are hastening. So he did that. In other words, he made 3 divorces to be exactly 3 divorces in one sitting. Meaning to say that the wife is irrevocably divorced if the husband gives 3 divorces in one sitting. Whereas previously this was not the case. Muslim reported this narration. Hadith 931 وعن محمود بن اللبيد رضي الله عنه قال أخبر رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم عن رجل طلق امرأته 3 طليقات جميعا فقام غضبان ثم قال أيلعب بكتاب الله وأنا بين أظهركم حتى قام رجل فقال يا رسول الله ألا أقتله رواه النسائي ورواته موثقون. From Mahmud ibn Nabid, he says that the Prophet was informed that there is a man who divorced his wife 3 times in one sitting, and the Prophet stood up and he was angry and he said, "Is the book of Allah being played with whilst I am amongst you?" And to that, a man from the companions stood up and he said, "O Messenger of Allah, should I not kill him?" This hadith is sahih. Hadith 932 وعن ابن عباس رضي الله عنهما قال طلق أبو ركانة أم ركانة فقال له رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم راجع امرأتك فقال إني طلقتها 3 قال قد علمت راجعها رواه أبو داود. From Ibn Abbas, he says that a man called Abu Rukana divorced his wife Rukana, and the Prophet told him to return back to your wife. And the man said, "But I divorced her 3 times," meaning to say 3 times in one sitting, and the Prophet said, "I know, go back to her." And in a wording of Imam Ahmad, he says that Rukana divorced his wife 3 times in one sitting, and so then he regretted his decision, and the Prophet told him, فَإِنَّهَا وَاحِدَةٌ, it is only one. Meaning these 3 divorces in one sitting is in fact just one divorce. And Abu Dawud has another version that Rukana divorced his wife, who goes by the name of Suhaima. He divorced her irrevocably, and he informed the Prophet of this, and he told the Prophet that I only in fact intended one, meaning I only intended just one divorce, and so upon this the Prophet returned his wife to him. These narrations are da'if. Just a point to note here, in the first narration, out of these 3 versions, we're talking about Hadith 932 here, it says Abu Rukana. However, if we look into the books of biography, there is no Abu Rukana, rather there is just Rukana, which is the name used in the other versions of this hadith. So that name seems to be authentic, Rukana, not Abu Rukana. So these 3 narrations, Hadith 930, 931 and 932, are speaking of the same issue, which is the issue of divorcing your wife 3 times in one sitting. So telling your wife, you are divorced, and you are divorced. So we learn a few issues from these narrations. First of all, we learn that 3 divorces in one sitting is haram. Because the point is this, that when you divorce your wife first time, then she is in her iddah period. So if you divorce her again, then you are divorcing her in her iddah period. So you are divorcing her not in the correct time. Remember what we said. What is the correct time to divorce your wife? It is in a period of purity before you've had intercourse with her. And the point is that a divorced wife cannot be divorced again. The only way you can divorce her 2nd time round is if you take her back from her iddah period, so she becomes a full wife of yours again, and then you divorce her again in the proper time period. So we learn if a person pronounces 3 divorce in one sitting, I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you, then we learn from the first narration from Ibn Abbas that during the time of the Prophet and the Khilafah of Abu Bakr, this type of divorce, even though it is haram to do, would be counted as one divorce. So basically, the first time when you said I divorce, that is a proper divorce and that would be counted. But the next two divorces which you give would be a bid'ah, and they would not be counted. So we only count the first divorce. So 3 divorces in one sitting would be counted as one divorce. Most scholars, however, say if a person gives 3 divorces in one sitting, it is in fact counted as 3 divorces, which means that she is irrevocably divorced. She's not allowed to get back with this husband until she marries and consummates marriage with another man. Then if that divorce fails, she can then get back to the first husband with a new marriage contract. And the reason they give is because we find in this narration of Ibn Abbas that Umar radiallahu anh actually implemented this idea. He said that 3 divorces will actually now be 3 divorces. So they say that if it was ineffective and if it was haram, then Umar would not allow such a thing to happen, because how can Umar allow something which is haram to take place and put it into effect? Which is exactly what he did. But we say that Umar did not put it into effect thinking that this is permissible or even valid. Rather, he put it into effect to punish the people thereby, because the people have 3 divorces at their disposal. Now, why would you want to be silly and use up all 3 of these divorces in one sitting? And this is not allowed. So Umar here is giving the people a ta'zir, a punishment that will hopefully repel them from being silly. A similar case here is the issue of the wisal, which we spoke about in the Kitab al-Siyam. The Prophet forbade it, but we find the companions, in their eagerness to perform worship, they did al-wisal. So they did not break the fast at Maghrib and they continued on fasting, despite the Prophet forbidding it. So, as a reaction to this, the Prophet implemented al-wisal on the companions, not because he approved of al-wisal, but rather as a punishment for them. So what we know is that he made wisal with them one day and then the next day as well. And then what happened is that the hilal of Shawwal showed up, and the Prophet said that if this hilal did not show up, meaning if Ramadan was to continue, then I would have continued making wisal with you. And this is as a means of punishment for them, because they didn't obey the Prophet when he told them not to make al-wisal. So the point is that the Prophet did something which is forbidden for the companions. He did it with them, not as a means of approval, but as a means of punishment. And so a similar thing here, Umar implemented this idea of 3 divorces in one sitting being literally 3 divorces, not as a means of approval, but as a means of punishment and hopefully a deterrent. So what Umar did here was more of a political move. Most scholars say that 3 divorces in one sitting is in fact 3 divorces and she is irrevocably divorced. As for this narration of Ibn Abbas, clearly states that 3 divorces in one sitting is in fact 1 divorce. They interpret this to mean that it means these are 3 divorces before the husband enters into privacy with his wife, or before the husband has intercourse with his wife, meaning before he consummates marriage. So if he divorces her thrice in one sitting, it is counted just as 1 divorce. And so to this we have to simply gasp in astonishment, and we have to say this is really a wondrous interpretation. How is it that you can take a hadith and put it in a context which is so rare and take it away from a context which is much more in occurrence? Meaning to say, it occurs much more than the way you've interpreted it. Just compare, which is more often the case? A man divorcing his wife 3 times in one sitting before he consummates marriage, or after he consummates marriage? It is all too clear that these 3 divorces in one sitting happen after the marriage is consummated. As for before consummation of the marriage, hardly anyone will divorce his wife, because a man simply can't wait to get in bed with his wife, leave alone divorce her. Rather, what is far more common is that a man divorces his wife thrice after the marriage has been consummated, they've gotten used to each other, and some argument takes place, the man is extremely angry, and he divorces his wife 3 times because he simply cannot stand her. This is what normally happens 99% of the times. We have other examples in which some scholars have given amazing interpretations by taking the hadith away from what normally happens and interpreting it in a context which is rare. For example, the Prophet ﷺ saying, "Man mata wa alayhi siyam sama anhu waliyuh." Whoever dies and he has fasting left on him, meaning left on him to complete, then his near relative will fast on his behalf. Some scholars took this to mean in the context of a siyamun nadhr, where somebody vows to perform an act of fasting and he dies before fulfilling his vow. So if this is the case, then his wali will fast on his behalf. But we ask ourselves, let's compare. Which is most common? Somebody dying and he has Ramadan fasts left on him, or somebody dying and he has fasts of a vow left on him to perform? It is all too clear that Ramadan is far more frequent than a vow. So now how can we take this hadith away from the context in which it is most likely to occur and interpret it in a context which is rare in comparison to the Ramadan context? It simply does not make sense. Here's another one. The Prophet ﷺ saying, if a dog licks in the water bowl which belongs to you, then its purity is that you have to wash it 7 times and the first time with dust. Some scholars said that this hadith does not apply to the dog which you own, so that if your dog licks into your bowl, for example he drinks some water in a water bowl, then this hadith does not apply. Rather, this hadith applies to a dog which comes from outside, so it's not a dog which you own. So again, we have to gasp in astonishment. We have to say, okay, let's compare. Which is most frequently the case? A dog which you own drinks from the water bowl, or a dog which comes from outside drinks in your water bowl? The answer is all too obvious. So how can we take this hadith away from its usual context and interpret it in a rare context? And the reason why you could find many scholars making outrageous interpretations is because they believe one thing first, and then they would try to interpret the hadith to agree with what they previously believe. Whereas of course it should be the other way around. It should be that you look at the evidences and then you extract from these evidences what you ought to believe. So we say then that the opinion which is in accordance with the evidence, as we have just seen in the narration of Ibn Abbas, is that 3 divorces in one sitting is in fact just 1 divorce, and this is the minority opinion, but it is the opinion that is in accordance with the narration. And surely this is the only thing which has to matter. Although having said that, if a Khalifa, which we are living under, implements this policy that 3 divorces in one sitting is in fact 3 divorces, just as Umar did, and he does this as a deterrent for the people, then he is well within his rights to do this, just as Umar radiallahu anh did, and this is a means of ta'zir. On this issue, the Rafidah say that 3 divorces in one sitting does not occur. So not even 1 divorce occurs, and we can see that this is in conflict with the narration of Ibn Abbas. And we also find from this hadith that the Khalifa can punish a people by taking away that which they have a right to own. So here in this case, the husband has the right to take back his wife after 3 divorces. In one sitting, of course, because it only counts as 1 divorce, but the Khalifa can take this right away from him if he wants to punish the people in this way. And just looking at this through pure reason, we find that divorcing your wife 3 times in one sitting is nothing but foolishness, because it would have been perfectly sensible for you to divorce her once, and then at least you would have a choice to take her back. But this person now, in divorcing her thrice, is depriving himself of this choice to take her back. So why would you want to do something in which there is no benefit for you whatsoever? If anything, there is a harm. And so if a person makes this type of decision, then we have to say it is nothing but foolishness. From the second narration, we take that 3 divorces in one sitting is a major sin. And the reason is because the Prophet described this as playing with the Book of Allah. And playing with the Book of Allah can only be for a major sin, not a minor one. And we also know that the Prophet became angry, and he would only become angry when the limits of Allah are violated. So we find then that 3 divorces in one sitting is not only haram, it is a major sin. We also take that this idea of taking the Sharia lightly is bad enough as it is. However, it is far worse during the time of the Prophet. Because there now, you're not only taking the Sharia lightly, but you're also taking the Prophet lightly. Because to commit this sin in the presence of the Prophet, or during a time when the Prophet is around, this is in fact taking the Prophet lightly as well. This is why the Prophet is saying, is the Book of Allah being played with whilst I am amongst you? So it is worse to play around with the Book of Allah when the Prophet is amongst you, rather than doing it, let's say, centuries later. We find in this narration as well that the man informs the Prophet that another man divorced his wife thrice. And so we find then that it is permissible to inform the leader of some sort of evil which is happening, so that the leader will be able to put an end to this sinful activity. Also we find that you should immediately prohibit the evil, because here, as soon as the Prophet heard about this evil which has taken place, he immediately stood up and he was angry and he rebuked this action. We also take from this that the Sahaba were extremely passionate about this deen and about the Prophet and the Book of Allah not being taken lightly. This is why one of them stood up and he said, should I not kill this man? Because anyone who is playing about with this Sharia or taking the Prophet lightly and not giving him the due respect, then this is a serious issue, and we can see the attitude of the companions towards this type of issue. They would simply not tolerate this. Similarly, we have the case of Hatib ibn Abi Balta'a, where he informed the mushrikeen that the Muslims are about to attack them before the conquest of Mecca, and Umar wanted to kill him, because Umar had this zeal and this desire for Islam and the Prophet, and anyone who is caught being a traitor, then off with his head. But of course we know in this emotional episode that the Battle of Badr was the deciding factor which saved Hatib. So what about a case like this then with 3 divorces? Are we allowed to kill such a person because a man got up and he said, O Messenger of Allah, allow me to kill him? We say no, you're not allowed to kill such a person. The Prophet did not allow this to happen. Rather, we have to rebuke such a person and prevent people from committing this major sin. Then in the third narration, which is Hadith 932, we find here that the man tells him that he divorced his wife 3 times in one sitting. Notice the Prophet did not ask, was this your 3rd divorce or not? He simply told the man to return back to the wife. But the point is it not, that if it's the 3rd divorce, then he's not allowed to go back to the wife, is he not? Because she will be irrevocably divorced, which is the Baynunatun Kubra, which we spoke about. Well, what we can conclude from this is that the Prophet knew about the case of this man, and he knew that this was not, in fact, the 3rd divorce. And so this is why he did not ask, is this your 1st divorce or 3rd divorce? So we can say that a mufti, when he's asked a question and he already has background information about the case, he does not need to inquire further. He would only need to inquire further when he does not have background information which he needs for his fatwa, meaning certain information which can make all the difference to the fatwa which he gives. So in a case like this then, he would need to inquire further. And so this hadith, though it is weak, proves just what the narration of Ibn Abbas proves, which is that 3 divorces in one sitting is in fact 1 divorce. As for the difference of opinion, do 3 divorces in one sitting count as literally 3 divorces, meaning making the wife irrevocable, or not? Then this is a massive difference of opinion. Much has been said and written about it. The majority of the scholars, and the 4 great imams included in them, they hold the opinion that 3 divorces in one sitting is in fact 3 divorces. They use the narration of Rukana, when Rukana tells the Prophet that I only intended 1 divorce. And so the Prophet deemed it to be 1 divorce. So what they say is that this means if he intended it to be 3 divorces, then indeed it would be 3 divorces. Your actions are by your intention. And they also use as the evidence what Umar ibn al-Khattab did. He implemented the 3 divorces as 3 divorces. Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah opts for the minority view, and he was living in a time when the official line was 3 divorces is in fact 3 divorces. So any scholar who openly opposes this idea would in fact be subject to punishment, or at least risk it anyway, and Ibn Taymiyyah would give this fatwa secretly. From the evidences is the narration of Ibn Abbas, and that is clear-cut. It does not allow for any other interpretation. Likewise, we know that 3 divorces in one sitting is haram in and of itself. And if you do something which is haram in and of itself, then it does not take effect, because it is not in accordance with the matter of al-Islam, and according to the famous hadith, whoever performs an action not in accordance with this matter of ours will be rejected. So in other words, its presence is like its absence. So the presence of the 3 divorces in one sitting is like its absence. It's as if you did not give 3 divorces. But only that first divorce counts, because that is in accordance with the matter of al-Islam. As for this narration of Rukana ibn Abd Yazid, which is the proper name, not Abu Rukana, then this narration is da'if, and the authentic narration is sufficient for us. Okay, let's take some review questions. So question number 1. What are the 3 types of women for whom the bid'i divorce does not apply? And give the reasoning behind it as well. Question number 2. In trying to answer the question, does a bid'i divorce count as such or not? What would be the problem for a person trying to opt for the safer opinion? Explain the answer. Question number 3. We said that the stronger opinion is that 3 divorces in one sitting do not count as 3, they count only as 1. Yet we find in the narration of Ibn Abbas in the Sahih that during the Khilafah of Umar, he made it count as 3. So did he oppose the Shar'i ruling? Explain this scenario.